Hello, and welcome to The Brood. I'm here with Josh.
Hello.
And Chris.
Hi there.
Tonight we're going to talk about revenge horror films. And we picked three films. First, I Spit on Your Grave, considered one of the classics, or at least one of the most notorious revenge horror movies ever. A more recent film, Martyrs, and The Skin I Live In. I think we'll start with I Spit on Your Grave, and maybe we can talk a little bit about the revenge film in the 70s when we talk about this, if you guys have something to bring in there, because that was kind of the era where this blossomed and became a really gritty, realistic, morally ambiguous genre for people. Yeah, but I think, Josh, you had a quote from Mr. Ebert about I Spit on Your Grave. Maybe you could throw that out there for us.
I do. This is the final paragraph of his original review for this film when it first came out. This movie is an expression of the most diseased and perverted, darker human natures. Because it is made artlessly, it flaunts its motives. There's no reason to see this movie except to be entertained by the sight of sadism and suffering. As a critic, I have never condemned the use of violence in films. I felt the filmmaker had an artistic reason for employing it. I Spit on Your Grave does not. It is a geek show. I wonder if its exhibitors saw it before they decided to play it, and if they felt as unclean afterwards as I did.
So he liked it? Oh, no. Oh, wait,
ambiguous.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Well, it's strange. I disagree with it, and I've disagreed with him before. I think it's a very artful film, and I think it's a really strong film filled with a lot of really powerful things, I think that there's a definite motivation behind the violence. I don't think it's a geek show. It's shocking, and I think it's still shocking, but I think that it's done in a very artful way.
See, and I also very much disagree with him. While kind of, I think that a lot of the artfulness of the film is almost accidental. It's like this. It's one of those things where almost like a failure on the filmmaker's part to do something interesting becomes its own interesting thing. There's like these extended shots of just. It all of a sudden takes on something else that's almost unintentional. But either way, it raises the question of why artfulness would be an excuse for violence, which I don't is a bigger question.
Yeah, I guess that maybe it's some kind of it's morally justified if it can be morally justified if it's artfully done or something. I don't see exactly where those two things come together. I don't totally understand his point. I know he loves Dawn of the Dead, and that, for example, is like horrifically violent, but it's making a very clear social statement. But I think that I Spit on Your Grave is serving a kind of a social purpose as well, a different one.
That might be go ahead. Go ahead, Josh.
I was just going to say, before we go too far down this rabbit hole, maybe we should kind of give a summary of...
Yeah, that's what I was going to do, too. That was a good point to bring it in, though, because the whole moral purpose. So the movie itself is pretty simple, and I think it's pretty well known, but it's about this woman, a writer, who goes to this country farmhouse on a lake to write, and she encounters a few men in the town, and there's this, that just for not really much of a reason and with not much of a sense of leading up to it, there's this rape scene where she's raped by these, I think, four men, and it's an extended scene. It goes on for, I'd say, over a half an hour, I think. It's right in the middle of the movie, and then then there's the revenge part, which is pretty obvious is what's going to happen, is that she gets her revenge. It seems like, I don't want to talk too much about Ebert because there's more people to talk about and more things to bring in, but it seems like most of his problem with this movie comes in the rape scene part, and I think most people's problem with the movie comes with that. And I feel like there's something about the way it's filmed that makes people react this way. Because there's many other movies with with that rape revenge plot that aren't so roundly criticized as this one. So I wonder if you guys had feelings about that. I have thoughts, but I want to hear kind of what you guys think first.
I think that it's pretty stark, and I think that's probably and it's kind of, you know, protracted, like it goes on for quite a while. But I think that the problem is that a lot of people, I feel like, say, well, you know, if you're watching this for this extended period of time, like there's going to be some people out there that are enjoying this, seeing this, and this is going to be just entertaining and something like, you know, titillating for them. But I really don't think that it invites that at all. It's such an unpleasant. I mean, it's a very intense sequence that goes on for a very long time. But I feel like it's a really, really well done sequence. It's the center of this movie. It's like, you know, it has great moments. It has different revelations about different characters and different dimensions. It all is shot very starkly and somewhat like objectively, but I think that there's a lot of artfulness specifically in that whole sequence. But I do think it has something to do with the kind of detached nature of the way that it's shot. I think that is bothering certain people. It's not a morally charged camera, really.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the one thing that does make that charge kind of worth paying attention to is to raise the question of why that decision was made. You know, why a half an hour long scene? You know, quite often these things take place off camera, or, you know, they're implied, and there's no implication in this movie. This movie doesn't understand implication. And so the fact that it is, you know, it's so brutal, it's so extended, and I guess my sense is that it's meant as balance, that it's meant to, it's kind of holding it up, kind of rubbing your face in it, saying, so that you'll understand how terrible it is to pay for the second half of the movie. You know? Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure, in my experience of the movie, kind of works the opposite way. Like I find the revenge half of the film actually just 1,000 times less compelling than the first half of the film, which may make me some sort of sicko. But
no, you find the second half less compelling than the first half?
Yeah, it doesn't. It all of a sudden wants to develop a plot, and I don't buy that plot really
It becomes more conventional, I think, in that point. And that part's a lot shorter, actually, which was surprising to me this time around. I think that one thing I noticed this time is, first of all, this film doesn't have a score, except, I think, in one moment when she goes to a church. And so there is a real starkness. A lot of things are allowed to play out. It's a very, very simple movie, and I think it's kind of brilliant in its simplicity, because although there is some kind of, you know, there's some psychological explorations going on of like all these characters. Surprisingly, I think it is there in the rape scene. But anyway, it's a kind of a simple film, but anyway, I think you have to see this scene, this centerpiece, this rape scene, to really understand where Jenny, the main character, arrives at in the end, because she arrives at a very interesting place, a very specific choice as an actress and a character of no tears. There's nothing like that happens. This rape scene happens, and then it's even hard to describe that performance, but I think it's a great performance that she has in in the revenge portion of the film. And I think you understand it. It's informed by the ordeal that you see happen in front of you. And I really appreciated that this time. I mean, that it is strong. And the one last thing I will bring up, which might be leading to something else, is that also this scene happens where she's, raped, tortured, essentially, and it's horrific. And then afterwards, she doesn't decide to call the cops. She doesn't contact anybody. She just goes back and starts putting her life back together immediately. And I think that's very interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I have I'm of two minds of the whole rape scene. Like, to some extent, it becomes tedious to me, and I didn't like that reaction. I wanted to, I don't know, I feel like I wanted to buy in more to what was happening, but I started to be bored by this, even though it's horrific. But I did like that there were these moments throughout the scene where you saw things escalating to a point. Like characters would exchange looks, there'd be a kind of, I don't know, there's some sort of tacit agreement between people occasionally about what was going to happen next, and it kind of showed this process of something escalating. I do love that point, Chris, about what she does afterwards. That she kind of I don't know, disassociates to some extent. She makes a decision. She acts a certain way. There's no sense of her turning back or, and it's hard to imagine what her life is going to be like after the movie ends, which ends in this crazy sort of, she's on a boat and then the movie's over. And I watched this with a friend who'd never seen this movie before. And after the rape scene, after there's a little bit of this kind of showing of trauma with the shaking and the, she puts her story back together. She's a writer, and part of that rape scene was this humiliation with tearing up her book. And I watched this with a friend, and afterwards she said, it's like she just snapped. She just disassociates. She's just like, screw it. I'm going to go do this, and I don't care what happens to my life afterwards. And we had this conversation about, like, what do you think happened after the credits? And she said, I don't think she even cares. I think she just left with this guy in the bathtub and these people, these dead bodies. There's a sense where the movie just stops at this point, and there's no more real life with this character. I don't know. That was my feeling, and that was kind of powerful to me, and I liked that about the movie. But something about the rape scene doesn't sit with me, like, aesthetically and not morally or ethically. And I can't quite figure what it is wrong with it, to me.
I think it's a lot. There's a lot of wides. You know, I think that it doesn't, and that it doesn't have the same kind of intensity that something I feel like maybe like Straw Dogs or something like that might have, you know. But I do want to comment on what you said, that like you said, she just says screw it and does it. She disassociates it, and I think that's part of why this movie stands the test of time, because it just has that attitude, like that's even implicit in the name. You know, I think the more I watched it and kind of watched her performance and what happened in the second half of the movie, I'm like, this is a tough movie that's saying she doesn't care. I don't even think she psychologically, I don't think she snapped. I think she said they deserve to die, you know, for what they did, and I don't care. Like, and I think that's really interesting. And the more I watched it, I was like, I think she's thinking pretty clearly, you know, and that whole, and just the sentiment of the title resonates, and you're like, kind of like, yeah, this is kind of awesome, you know, but anyway.
I think there's a couple of things about that, and one, I'm pretty sure that there was a second working title for this, was something like The Year of the Woman or something like that.
The Day of the Woman.
Yeah, which, you know, I wonder why they didn't stick with that. But, you know, which kind of gives it a whole, I mean, it takes what you're saying, Chris, and kind of squares it. That, you know, that this is supposed to become like an empowering film, right? Like this is, and I don't really want to get into Django Unchained since I haven't seen it. But, you know, there have been these accusations made that, you know, this is like a white man's version of what black revenge would look like. And I don't want to lend any credence to that argument, like I said, but I do think that there's a sense that is what this film does, that this is like a man's version of what female empowerment should look like or something. You know, this is the way that we will kind of combat these subhuman men, is that we'll become these, you know, women will say hell no and run around creating these intricate plots to lure them in and, you know, emasculate them and murder them. And I wasn't buying any of that in this film.
I think it's an exploit.
Go ahead, Chris.
I was going to say, I think it's an exploitation of that idea. I think it's a way of, I think it's a capitalization on that, definitely, you know, on a women's lib sentiment. and kind of transferring that into a horror theme. So I don't think exactly it's a, kind of it's not a nuanced feminist text in any to any degree, but I think at the heart of it, it was trying to do something with that, but in a pretty, it's the Texas the Texas Chainsaw Massacre of women's lib.
I agree with that. Like, and I see what your both your points, but to me, this is the most interesting part of movies like this. And it's so explicitly responding to feminist issues of the time. Like, it's so explicitly responding to the backlash against feminism. The characters say things that are so textbook rape culture-y and sort of about these fancy women showing their legs, how dare this. It's so explicitly calling upon that. It's so obvious. But what I think is cool is that the men are so obviously awful. Just it feels to me like this exorcism of everything ugly. And it is to some extent like a male version of female empowerment, but it's also seems to me, this is how I saw it, as maybe a way for a male director to get all these ugly things about masculinity on the screen and kill them. Which I think is so much of what we do with art, get things out, and especially horror movies. The monstrous, you have a monster and you kill it, or you don't. It's a monstrous part of sort of history of masculinity, of all these cultural things.
Yeah.
It seems to me to have a function.
And that's one of the things that's interesting, and there is a fine line here between these revenge films and what we would traditionally call horror. Certainly these 70s films walk a line there. And that I guess that what I almost missed from this movie is the monster. That it's too literal. It's too, it's just so much about what it's about. And that I could use a little metaphor, that I could use a creature wandering through the woods to exact revenge on these guys or something. I want the artifice at some point, and that I wasn't getting that.
Yeah, I mean, this is more this is closer to Cronenberg or something like that, I think, than it is to a creature feature kind of thing. But I mean, I do agree though with both of you, but I wanted to get to what you were saying, Letitia, about how putting these things out there and then killing them. Especially, I think that's what's really good about that rape scene that's powerful, is that you see the way these men, these types, are participating in the rape. You have the ringleader guy who thinks he understands women and thinks he understands the relationship between, the sexes. And then you have just the balding guy who the last rapist who is just so angry towards women and wants to just hit her. And then you have the whoever the grocery guy is. Anyway, I think they all typify a certain kind of dimension of what you were talking about. I think maybe that is what's important about that rape scene and a big part of it why it's there. Because they all
vendors without shirts.
Exactly.
Keep it all out there.
That is ugly.
Just subtle characterizations, a grocery boy and a guy with no shirt and a guy with a jumpsuit with a hat. That's.
Well, I wanted to go back to what Letitia was saying about Letitia, you were trying to kind of frame this in its context of a 70s revenge thing, and I think that's worth coming back to because a lot of those films, when we have the 70s kind of new Hollywood coming along, we have a lot of anti-heroes, and kind of the Hollywood reaction to that seemed to be to create a lot of vigilantes, and so you've got your Charles Bronson and but those kinds of films seem to me to be more interested in ideas of some sort of frontier justice or something that it's about evening the score and the system doesn't work, so we need Charles Bronson to come in and shoot some punks And I wonder, this movie's really weird when I try and place it along that, because I guess when I try and think about revenge versus justice, I mean, the movie is pretty troubling in that regard, because I don't even know how to begin. You know, when I consider what has been done, I have no way of framing an appropriate response to it. You know, like what the appropriate punishment should be, or how it should be handled. It's so kind of above and beyond anything I can imagine that I don't know whether you call this justice or, you know, or is it just revenge? Is this just her acting out of, you know, and I mean, that's getting us closer to asking the question of what our theme even means here.
Yeah. I think that's why the rape scene is so goes to the extent that it does, is to make that actually a hard question. And I think the film does a good job of not laboring over that too much. Like it leaves that to you pretty much. I mean, because it just kind of, there's a quiet sequence, a quiet, you know, few minute stretch after that scene, and then the revenge happens. And I like that. I like that there's not a lot of kind of moralizing or never really explicitly talked about, where something like Death Wish is really pretty explicitly about that, you know, and there is, and in Death Wish, he's going after these people. It's very much about justice tinged with, it's sparked by revenge because, you know, the system didn't work, you know, and now this film is different. The system is not even a factor. Right. You know, I think it's more clearly, it's much, much, much more clearly revenge. But yeah, when we start talking about what's justified, I think the film creates a scenario where that question is moot. Like, we have to. It's like, you can't say that it wasn't. Maybe, I don't know.
Right. Well, I think, like, I don't know, if you're putting yourself in the shoes of a person who's been incredibly brutalized, of course that's the first feeling, like, kill these people. And the movie, like, says, okay, this is a legitimate feeling. Let's go with it. But I think what's interesting is that there's also those little hints of, like, the life outside of this event, which doesn't happen very often until the second half of the movie, where you see the ringleader guy's wife, for example, showing up to the gas station and being like, where is he? He's a great guy. He wouldn't just leave. But, so I guess I'm skipping around. That's one point. Secondly, I'm interested in the order of deaths in this movie. Like, who she kills first and why. And I feel like that has something to do with the idea of culpability. Like, who's the most responsible for this act? Like, the last two people that die are the kind of follow along guys. The first one is the sort of developmentally disabled, I guess we're supposed to think, guy, the grocer. And then the second is the ringleader guy. And I've always wondered, like, is that something about, like, I'm going in many directions, so I'll stop here in a minute. But the grocery guy is sort of the character that you can most feel some sympathy with. Like, there's a kind of sweetness about him and innocence in a sense that he knows that this is not right. The second guy clearly has decided what he's going to do and doesn't care. And the other two are just kind of there for the ride. And I wonder if that has some relevance.
But at the same time, the last two to die are the most brutal. Like they, during the rape scene, they're like, have the most clear, like, violence in what they're doing. And,
right.
You know, that's something, you know, and they're also denied, I guess, the most characterization. But I don't know if that has something to do with it.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about the order, and I kind of like what you're saying there, that we're meant to read something in, and of course there's these various methods of dispatching of them too, which all seem rather, you know, are meant to hold some sort of thing. Which again gives her the appearance of being, you know, not broken, but methodical in the way she's going about dispensing with these people. I also find it a little bit troubling to hopefully not leave your point behind, Letitia, but to build off of it, that so much of the ways that she uses to kill these men off involve her then, of course, using her sexuality.
Yeah.
To lure them in, you know, that what kind of was, her weakness in the beginning. That's more, I think, the film's point of view than my own. Becomes her strength, that she has this power, and so that she can. It gets very troubling in there.
I think it's more, I could read that as, because I thought about that too, and I thought of it as, I don't think it really takes too much of a firm stance, but I think you could read it as it's her choice to employ her sexuality and her body for her own purposes. You know what I mean? And if to lure you is one of them, that's her decision. You know what I mean? And if you're stupid enough to fall for it, that's your problem. But I don't know if it has anything to do with her really coming to,
I really kind of love that on one hand. I mean, I like, the kind of in your face kind of like, oh, you're really scared of, feminists.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
I kind of love that, but again, the place it's coming from is still kind of troublesome for me. But I'm starting to sound like a moralizing ninny myself. But
No.
I mean, that's one thing though that I really like. This movie really shook me up again, and I think it's really it's still an effective film because I think, as adults and as responsible citizens, we should be having informed dialogues about these issues all the time. I do think there's about 2% of my brain or I don't know, of my life where I should be able to go, you know what? Yeah, fuck you. I spit on your grave. Like if you're going to do something like that. And I think that that's okay for me. And I think this film speaks to that part of people. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a place for something like that. And I don't think that's any kind of, we shouldn't be operating with that as like a guiding principle by any means. But I mean, I guess maybe I do believe in catharsis in some sense because this got to me again, and I thought it was a cool movie, Yeah,
I like all that, and I think the catharsis thing is really. I feel like if you watch this from a particular personal standpoint, this movie can be incredibly cathartic. Particularly if you've had a background with things like this perhaps happening. I don't know. From my personal experience, I occasionally was very, charged by the movie and but I don't think that a movie that is about that kind of catharsis is about making claims about how we should dispense with crime and justice. Like, I don't think it's about that or is making any kind of recommendations about, behavior. I just don't see it as being related to that, so it's hard for me to have a moral problem with the revenge movie, because it just seems to be in such a realm of the psychological and the dealing with trauma and the dealing with thoughts and fantasies. So it's hard for me to even think of those as being in the same realm.
And even something like the original Death Wish is really problematic like that. I think a lot of these films have a retroactive reading by people that makes them makes them into something they're not. Like you're saying, like, this is not promoting or laying out a legitimate, step-by-step process of dealing with anything like this. This is about, societal outrage, just like, Death Wish was. And if you go back and watch Death Wish, it has a lot on its mind, you know what I mean? But one last thing I did want to say about Camille Keaton, I just think she's so good in this movie. Like, I just was really into her performance, and she's just cool. And she's just as good as Charles Bronson, maybe better. Yeah.
I agree with that. Well, might this be a good point to move on to Martyrs?
Yeah.
Anything else you guys want to say?
No. Sorry. I proposed getting I Spit on Your Grave poster for our apartment, but I was denied that by the person who shares the space with me. So take that for what you will. I chose the film Martyrs from 2008. It's a French film by Pascal Laugier, and it's about a young girl who escapes from being held captive, and she's been abused while she's been held prisoner. She escapes and finds herself in an orphanage and befriends another young girl there. And as she gets older, she goes out and tries to find these people who had held her captive and tortured her because she wants revenge. And all the while, she's being haunted by this maybe real, maybe not specter of this woman that is horribly mutilated. That looks like she's been tortured as well, and it gets pretty intense. She finds the people who are responsible for holding her captive and torturing her, and attempts to get her revenge. And I don't know how much to really give away about what happens in the second part of the film, but it becomes very much not a revenge film after the second half, and becomes more about this kind of catalog of tortures, or following this process of torture and psychological breakdown that happens with one of the characters. I don't know. Can somebody else pick up here?
Well, yeah, like you said, it's kind of a fake out in that it sells itself in its first act as being a revenge film that then turns out to be something very different. We lose our protagonist for the most part, and the movie kind of shifts gears. But yeah, it's hard to talk about this movie in terms of revenge, because that doesn't seem to be a central theme really. But it does seem to just pick up right where we left off in our conversation of I Spit on Your Grave, when it comes to the representation of violence and extended representations of violence, and to what purpose, and if and when we find those purposes compelling or not. And in this case, I don't. I feel much more comfortable with I Spit on Your Grave in terms of its, even if I find it kind of ham-handed, this film's use of the violence seemed both empty and pretentious.
Yeah,
I like to clarify my statements. I'm sorry. I just like to lay it out there, and you guys.
No, I mean, I was trying. I guess I for something that seemed like it was. This film has a very, very grave tone. I mean, it's super serious, and very dark. But in the end, I really found myself asking, to what end, and that kind of left me with a bad taste in my mouth. I mean, I think it's very, very explicit in what it's about, and I think too much so, and I think that really limits any kind of real intellectual enjoyment or play you can have with this film. I don't know. I really don't know what to say about it. It's a movie that you don't really know what I'm supposed to get from it, really, as I don't even think it's particularly thrilling either.
Yeah. Well, I thought that the opening of the movie, where we do get that revenge part, not the very opening, but the part where things really get going. I don't know how much to give away. I guess, spoiler alert, there's a scene where the character comes in and basically just shotguns the whole family to death. And you're kind of like, whoa, because the family seems so normal and they're very sort of suburban. And that part, I liked that opening because it set up this. I was really excited to see what would happen next, to see what the deal was, what the relationship was to this person. But it abandoned that, and then I thought, okay, maybe it's going somewhere interesting, but it wasn't. And it's the explicitness of the scenes after that really annoyed me. It could be interesting. There could be interesting things happening, but there's something about being told themes and also just having to see them in repetitive, boring torture fashion.
I agree. I really like the first, half an hour of this movie in a lot of ways, and I think it's really very effective. And right until it shifts gears there, I was caught up in it. And one of the things that, and I think you're talking about it there, is that there's this ambiguity in it. We're kind of seeing the story through this other character's eyes. We've got this damaged character who's out for revenge, but we're really kind of closest to her friend who's gone there with her. And there's this question about what's real and what's not, and she believes that these people hurt her, and it's all kind of up in the air, and we're not sure. And then there's that moment where all of a sudden they find the door, and they open the door, and it's like, oh shit, and Israel, and I loved everything right through that moment. And then, like you said, ambiguity vanishes. Everything is so literal and so just kind of straightforward that, once again, can we get a little more artifice? Can we quit trying to shock me with your literalness, and what are you going to do with it is the question.
Yeah, nothing's revealed. And nothing is built in that second half of the film, and I think that's my problem, because, spoiler alert, the second half of this movie pretty much takes place in a cell with someone being tortured, and the thing that bothers me about this is it doesn't progress anywhere within that. I mean, there are films that largely take place in one room where characters develop and new perspectives are introduced, and it's interesting, it can say something. And this film even explicitly states that, this person is being tortured for the purpose of reaching some moment of clarity or new level of consciousness, but you don't see any of that. It's just redundant, and I don't think it's believable that that's where this person is ending up psychologically, and it's just, I think it's a waste of 30 minutes or however long it goes on for.
I agree, and to buy the film wanted you to buy that.
Yeah.
That was a wrong turn, I think. Those characters believe that I can accept, but in the end, that the plot is meant to bear them out in some way is just gross. And but you were saying that this could work, but it would have to have characters in it.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a film that doesn't have characters after the first half an hour. We don't have characters who want anything, who need anything, who converse with other characters. There's, and I think that this is a kind of a, not to generalize too much, it's a mark of this kind of new horror that seems to want to just dispense with character.
Yeah.
That we're used to following, and I think it's I think it's intentional, but we're used to kind of following and seeing through the eyes of a character. A lot has been said about this, and kind of these movies want to continually take that away from us, and kind of go, now what do you feel? And the answer for me generally is not much.
Yeah, but they still want us to care when these characters are crying and screaming at each other, and I'm like, I don't really care. I'm just irritated. I want, to know a little bit more about these people. And yeah, you start to get that during the first half of the film, but you don't get enough of that by the time that the second half comes to really be able to see any perceivable change in who she is while she's in this cell, besides some prosthetics or whatever. I just really just found it, maybe they thought it was a cool idea or something, but I'm like, hey, Psycho was made 50 years ago, and I don't know, this bothered me on certain levels. I did like the first half though a lot, actually. What you were saying, Letitia, about the breakfast scene, and she comes in and blows them all away, I was very intrigued. I thought it's really well shot.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was good. This was solid. And then where it went, I just thought was so convoluted. I just didn't like it. Maybe not convoluted enough. I don't know.
Chris, maybe you didn't bring up this point yet. Maybe I'm thinking you did, but maybe someone has said this at some point. But are we supposed to be enjoying this? That was the thing about the last part. Is it supposed to be? Are we supposed to be learning something about suffering from watching suffering? Are we supposed to be the ones having the experience? I just didn't understand the function of seeing, and this is my problem with all torture movies with torture as the primary thing that happens in the movie. I don't understand what I'm supposed to be feeling after a while. Am I supposed to be disgusted? Am I supposed to, at some level, be feeling it, embodying that feeling, and really getting the visceral? What is the point? And especially since this movie is so philosophical about what it's trying to do, and I think it's actually a cool idea.
Let's not be too nice. Let's not be too nice.
yeah.
That might not be the right word to use.
Yeah, it's not the right word, but I think it's what the person thought they were.
It thinks it. Yeah, they thought that.
It thinks it's philosophical, and I could see a movie working about this theme, but it would have to be if we act like you've already said, if we actually saw this thing happening and it actually had some effect. But anyway, go ahead.
If that was supposed to have an effect, Josh brought up this film in an email, Passion of the Christ, I think does
right.
pretty much what this movie is doing, right? But more effectively.
Well,
right. It's trying to do that too.
I think so, and that movie is effective for some, and when I watch it, I laugh because it comes off as comedy, and I think that's the difference is that Martyrs wants to have this philosophical center. It wants to create its own little cosmology, and the movie only makes sense if you're within it. But of course, nobody is. It's totally phony, and people who go and are genuinely moved by Passion of the Christ is not because of necessarily what is there, but because of what they bring to it, right? I mean, they're already within. They've already bought the story, And the problem is that there's nobody on the planet who has bought this story. Nobody comes to this going, yeah, you'll see God. It's phony and it.
Yeah, it's like it's like a paradox because I mean, yeah, you're supposed to be watching someone reach this enlightenment through deprivation, torture, where you're participating in the most stimulating activity a human being can be, participating in, which is watching something, and like you're receiving stimulation. It just doesn't work. Like, I don't understand. There's better ways to do that. And I think the other thing that I don't understand is these films that are supposed to be a commentary on our enjoyment of watching torture.
Right.
I feel like a lot of times people pull that card and they're like, oh, well, I'm just holding it up a mirror to you. And I'm like, who enjoys watching torture? I don't know where this huge,
right.
this huge collective of people that they keep saying like, this is just a commentary. Are there really that many people? Because I don't think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's that moment in Funny Games where the characters turn to the screen, and I just want to, smack them or something, Like,
yeah.
Like, no, what are you talking about? I think, let's use the question of enjoyment. There is something, and it's deeply connected to the horror genre that, in every slasher movie, we can watch Friday the 13th movies and watch the way that, those kill scenes become more realistic and more choreographed, and that is most definitely a part of what you're tuning in for.
Right, right.
Another revenge film that we didn't put on the list, but that I think we've all seen and enjoyed, was I Saw the Devil.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about that is that movie deals in violence, some of it being quite graphic, and it's the kind of like almost enjoyable sensation where you turn away, and you kind of pull your legs up because it's just, all of a sudden, we're in the moment. And you kind of feel yourself in that position, and you're like, no, don't do that. There's the scene in that film where he like cuts the Achilles tendon on his leg, and it's just like, you just like, I want to turn it inside out, and it lasts 15 seconds. It's super effective, and it comes closer to me and to my mind to something like catharsis. Like that you get that horrible kind of like a bodily sensation, and then it's gone. And it is almost enjoyable. This does not work that way. I think that these filmmakers have a complete misunderstanding about what that sensation is about.
Right.
I think it approaches.
Go ahead.
I was going to say the only thing I think it approaches for me, what I felt during that second half was some amount of fear, which is something honestly I don't feel a lot of times during horror films, and I was afraid of what they were how it was going to escalate. Now it escalates to a place I find totally ridiculous, and yes, this like pseudo-philosophical thing it has going on is stupid, but I will admit that there were moments of slight uncertainty of like what they were going to do to her. But once it just became very clear what was happening, I totally checked out and was not worried in the slightest. But I don't, I do have to admit that I think that might be a function of torture, is that moment before the torture of uncertainty of what is going to happen. And maybe that's based on my own fear of being, what's going to happen next what horrific thing is going to happen next. I think there's a little bit of that in here.
Yeah, I think that's totally true, and I totally get the function of enjoying violence, or I get that. It's when the violence becomes torture that I can't sustain that feeling that you just described, Chris, of wondering what's going to happen next. And when I can't sustain a feeling, and when it just becomes boring, and then it's lost. And I don't understand. And then I start to wonder, like, who does, like you said, who does enjoy watching this over and over? And it's not really even a judgment of ethics or morals. It's just more like, what is the aesthetic response they're getting that I don't have access to?
Yeah. I think it's just like a hypothetical person that has to exist for these films to keep being justified.
They do. I mean, these films are made, and not even these like critique films, but also just straight up torture. I mean, there is that term torture porn, and I don't know I don't watch enough movies that are labeled that to know what that really means.
I think this kind of it. This goes into that territory a bit. I think. I'm not that familiar with that kind of stuff. I think we definitely need to do an episode on that.
I think we do
too.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if we think about that in its pejorative sense, what we think of pornography as a negative term, then that's exactly what we're describing, right? I mean, that it's the violence without anything else for its own sake, without any character, without anything else, and that's exactly what we're responding to. It's bad pornography.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But well, speaking of, we're talking about bad pornography. We should talk about something now really good. We can talk about the Almodovar film.
Yeah. So I chose The Skin I Live In by Pedro Almodovar, which was just from 2011, 2012?
Yeah.
So the most recent of the batch. I'm not sure how to give a summary, or if I really should. Almodovar is a genius. I've loved all of his films, and I've loved watching the way his career's progressed. And I think this film is ingenious. I think it's a masterpiece. It does follow a revenge theme. There's a doctor, and the movie jumps around in time a lot. But at the center of the movie is a doctor who loses his wife, loses his daughter, who has some mental issues, but his daughter has, to his mind, been raped, and so he goes out seeking revenge on the young man who's as with everything in Almodovar, everything's in shades of gray. So there are no absolutes anywhere. But he goes out to exact revenge, and in one of the most creative revenge plots, and one of the most aesthetically beautiful and haunting and disturbing revenge plots ever. And then things start to go very wrong in terms of his revenge plot. And I don't know. I don't want to spoil this movie, because I got to say, the spoiler in this movie, I don't remember being. It was one of those that, as it crept up on me, I kept going, no.
Yeah.
No, and then it turns out, and it was just so perfectly done that I.
There's two things that usually I don't care about the spoiler thing, but I have to say somehow I didn't know at all anything.
I did
about
not either.
To be. and it enhanced my experience so much. Not even in a way where I was like, oh my god, but like it let me enjoy the subtlety of every revelation so much more. So if you can go into this blind, I definitely recommend it. But I will say that a good way to contextualize this with our revenge conversation is, I think this movie really gets to the heart of what is the purpose of revenge, and how can that change, and how that is very personal. I think you had brought that up, Josh. because I think we asked that question about I Spit on Your Grave, like, what is the purpose of her revenge, that she takes? It's very clear in Martyrs, or at least in a certain sense. This is really, really, really ambiguous. It gets very ambiguous, that question.
Well, I think, in Almodovar's movies, the sex and violence tend to go hand in hand. And they both tend to have this strangely redemptive quality to them. I mean, that's just kind of a theme that I see through most of his work. And he's one of the most beautifully amoral filmmakers that I can think of. Just a filmmaker who never judges his characters in any way. He winds them up and lets them go, and it's beautiful. But in terms of the revenge in this film, it seems to be driven by just a deeply damaged character. I mean, there's no sense that there's a logic or a justification for what's happening here. I mean, this man has lost it, and it's almost a Dr. Phibes kind of plot.
What I loved about this movie is the Antonio Banderas' character, who does so many things that you would be that are objectively wrong, I guess, at least illegal. But that I still had a lot of sympathy for him, and this is something in Almodovar movies that I sometimes feel very emotionally distanced from, which I'm okay with because I like the surfaces, I like the aesthetics, but this one I really felt for the characters, and it was because of this, the complexity and the ambiguity and the sense that these are human beings, lashing out irrationally, and it made me it felt very poignant to me, and it made me think of the revenge genre as a kind of ultimately really poignant, because it's about people trying to fix what's wrong sort of internally, through behavior or doing something to somebody else, and it's not going to work. It just never will, really. You can't undo things that way. It doesn't work, and it just made me really. I was on the point of tears a lot in this movie, which is so weird for me because I don't really do that for movies.
I think this movie, is very interesting because everyone is sympathetic. You know what I mean? You can feel for, and there's a lot of different kind of paths crossing, and for a while it was I like this also because you could say Antonio Banderas is our main character, but you follow two, three maybe other characters pretty closely for a while, and I think the thing that it does is that the revenge almost goes without saying, and it's just an assumption we have. It's a cinematic assumption that we have that is what he's going to do. It makes sense. It doesn't have to be justified anymore because it's been done a million times. But this just keeps opening up different layers of it over and over, and just kind of it almost disintegrates it through kind of it keeps putting it through another cycle or putting it through something else, and it just floats away at a certain point, and it's kind of just beautiful in a sense. I mean, this is just so deftly kind of put together that it transforms. I mean, it's very, in a certain sense, reflexive. I mean, it's a movie that transforms in many ways, and I think that is, I mean, it truly is it was unbelievable for me. But
I'm glad that you brought up, its structure and the way that it unfolds, because one of the things that the film does is that it reverses the order of the revenge narrative. We begin more in the present, and without even really knowing it, and the crime for which the revenge needs to be taken doesn't actually occur until later into the film, right? I mean, in flashback, and so that's correct, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. And so that in itself is like we were saying in the, I Spit on Your Grave, very explicitly goes out of its way to build, here is the offense, and now here's, and that's, the way revenge films work. There's a dead body, now we need a revenge. And this movie totally flips that, and we're living inside the revenge before we even really know it. And then we see the crime, and I love that, and I think that it goes back to what Letitia was saying about how it's all mistaken. All of these are mistaken, and that just kind of highlights that it's like, we get to that point, and you're like, it's almost like, really? That's there's no equivalency here. What are we talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we're just inside. We're already inside of it.
Yeah, I think this takes it up. It faces that. It's the only film that really faces that head on in a really smart, complicated way. And I think, you, Josh, and Letitia, that's a really good way of putting it. That this psychological desire to correct something that can't be. This huge gulf between the world as it is and what we would want to be in some way, and like this film puts itself right into that huge gap and like sucks you right into it. I mean, it's beautiful.
Yeah, I think that we're getting at that. Letitia raised the question, what is revenge for? And I think that this movie kind of points us to the direction of what that is. It's that wish to, relive the past differently. That this was done to me, and so I would like to be able to recreate that narrative where I have the upper hand. And we live that every day. Like in the I wish I'd said that kind of internal monologue. And in The Skin I Live In, it's about a man driven to literally recreate the past, to rebuild it out of flesh and blood, and remake, what he had and what he lost, and this again is what I was missing from those other films. It's that that those layers of meaning, that some sort of, artifice feels like the best word for this movie. It's all about artifice, and it's about, and because that's what revenge is, right? It's the phony narrative that we put on top of, reality, and I'm officially rambling, but
No. I think, to go back to something to kind of address all three films, I feel like if we were talking about catharsis, and I guess that can happen in a lot of different ways, but these three films, I experienced them three different ways. Like, I Spit on Your Grave surprised me that it made me feel like pretty, I don't know, like excited, like in a certain sense at the end, and like in touch again with that raw nerve of anger, and like about these kind of things, and like, being, anyway, that's where that movie took me. Then Martyrs honestly took me nowhere. Like, I really felt nothing during that film, and like I really, that to me that was like a failure. And then with The Skin I Live In, it just made me feel like, I don't know, transported in some way to a new understanding of these things. I think it's such a psychologically real movie that I felt like I feel like I know more about people, like, after watching it, because it puts it out there in such a delicate way.
And I think, we've raised the question of morality in these films. What I love is that, exactly what you said. That this is a film that creates empathy. That I understand human beings a little better. I understand the urge for revenge. I understand the futile nature of revenge. I understand in a film that never tries to make a statement about anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's to circle back around to Ebert's claim. I think that this is the nail in his argument's coffin. That to be a really mature work, he doesn't need to sell us anything. He has well created characters in a well structured story, put together beautifully, and it's honest, and it does its thing, and it doesn't need it doesn't need to apologize for itself in the way I feel Ebert wants films to apologize for themselves.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. I think anything made well with the kind of clarity that Almodovar has about what he wants to do, I think is going to have something human in it and doesn't need to like do that. Exactly. That's exactly what, and something about the aesthetic beauty and the pleasing structure and the character, like something about all that put together, as artificial it is so touching in a way that like realism isn't, which I think you already said, Josh, so I just repeated what you said earlier.
No.
But I agree. Well, does anyone have anything else to say about The Skin I Live In or revenge in general? We have so many other revenge films that we didn't talk about. If you guys want to bring in anything from other sources or other films you saw during this time when we were watching revenge films.
I did get a chance to go back to Last House on the Left, which I feel like I should, but because it's so, that and I Spit on Your Grave seem to go hand in hand for some reason in people's minds. But that's something I'd like to revisit. But I'll say that I Spit on Your Grave I think really holds up, and I think it is. I have to disagree with Ebert completely. I think it is artful. I think it's a surprisingly very quiet film, and I think it in a certain sense, I'm going to sound crazy, it borders on art house in certain senses. I feel like in some of the duration and the setting, and I think that it's a film that needs to be given a second chance by a lot of people. I haven't seen the remake, but I don't think I really want to.
No.
Yeah, and I mentioned, I Saw the Devil, and I'd say, for whatever reason, the Korean filmmakers have got this revenge market cornered, and
yeah,
and again, in much the same way, I think that was a really well-made film that walked all kinds of weird tonal lines. It was an action movie, it was a kung fu movie, it was a serial killer movie, it was this, it was everything, kind of all balled into one frenetic mix, and I really liked it. And of course, Old Boy and that whole revenge trilogy. That again, like The Skin I Live In, that just give us characters who are driven by this, kind of futile, bizarre but human desire for revenge, and we just watch how that ruins everything. And I would put a pitch in for those films. I think Old Boy is obviously another one that's up for a remake, right?
Yep.
Ugh, why?
I think is is on the level of Greek tragedy. I think that movie is pretty well perfect. And Lady Vengeance, I think, might get close to The Skin I Live In terms of its just being a beautiful film that investigates these themes.
I don't actually have anything to add, so I was glad you guys had something. I haven't been able to watch. I intended to watch Virgin Spring, which I'd seen a while ago, which is kind of a rape revenge film. I mean, Last House on the Left is the same plot, actually, basically.
I was going to bring that up, actually. I feel like almost tonally, I Spit on Your Grave is closer to Virgin Spring. Story-wise, obviously, Last House on the Left is, but I don't know, something. I was just thinking about that. I do want to go return to that too, because obviously that's a great film as well.
Yeah, and we should do a Tarantino show sometime to get back in the revenge thing. I know he's not quite horror, but I think we could kind of make it work. Because I think
he loves revenge.
Right, and he's often critiqued for the way he does revenge, and I've seen Django Unchained, and I had a lot of complicated feelings about it. But there's no disputing that it's well made, which I think he could do that part very well. But I'd be curious to see what you guys think about his revenge style. So maybe in the future we'll do that.
Well, and that question, which we've kind of been skirting around, is the question that which goes all the way back to the very beginning of our conversation with Ebert's review, is being well made, enough? Is that because there's.
I know what you mean. I mean, Triumph of the Will is well made.
Right.
I mean,
right.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to say. Arguably, Birth of a Nation is well made. So I mean, I think that, well, I don't think that these, and I don't know if that's the question. I don't know if these, I think mainly I Spit in Your Grave is the one that someone could accuse of putting forth something that's really ugly and saying that it's justifiable in some sense. I don't think Martyrs really does. Martyrs, who knows? Like, that's just, I don't really know where that film falls in. And then The Skin I Live In is so nuanced. So I feel like, you know, I guess I don't think that being well made is enough if you're explicitly peddling an agenda of hate and violence.
Right.
But, you know, I don't think I Spit in Your Grave is doing that necessarily.
Well, I think the phrase "well made" needs to be defined. Like, that's not, to me, that's not just about aesthetics or direction. There's also something about thought and emotional content and characterization. That word includes the ideas, I think.
What about when the content is so intentionally ugly?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it seems very, very hard to dissociate the moral. Almost every way we try and talk about whether these films are good or not comes back to some sort of moral claim at some level. That because it seems like we need certain films with certain content. We feel the need that they have to justify themselves.
Right.
I'm not saying I agree with this. I'm just saying that it's the fact, and in ways that we don't expect, you know, a lot of other content to justify itself. And it's tricky because I think that I do that. I think that I do hold certain content up to a higher standard. You have to convince me that there was a reason why I wanted to watch this. You know, why I'm enjoying this, even if it's well made. Well, you know, over the last summer I read Starship Troopers, the Heinlein book, which is a really well put together book. It's really fun. It's you know, it reads fast. It's got these great kind of meaty little characters that you get into, you associate with the main character, and in the end, it's basically fascist propaganda, you know, and you know, it makes it's still sitting on my shelf, you know, and because I have this bizarre kind of relationship to it, because just the way that makes me feel to have gotten so engrossed and so caught up in the well-structured artifice that I went along with them.
Well, maybe, you know, this rating system, you know, the MPAA, like, you know, of what's appropriate for children, what's appropriate for adults. I mean, I really think an adult has the right and can handle anything like something, say, like Straw Dogs. Like, I like that film a lot, but I don't really agree with that film. Like, I think it's a very, very well-made film. I think it's a masterpiece by a great filmmaker, but the moral at the center of that film, or even like its politics, I don't agree with, like, essentially. And I think that but as an adult, I can make that distinction, and I think that's okay. I think something more explicit, I mean, if we're talking like out and out racism or something fascist, you know, or that is way more problematic. But I think that it's okay to interface with works of art that you disagree with. And I think that, you know, I Spit in Your Grave is something maybe, you know, Rod Ebert could disagree with, but I don't think that it's artless in any way. I don't know.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to lead us off into the stratosphere there, but
no, that's great. I mean, it's central, right, to what we're talking about. I think it's important. All right. Well, thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.